Good morning and welcome to Rosebud Homestead. Today is December the 21st, that's winter solstice, and this is the holiday season. A number of different holidays from various religious groups are celebrated right now, and we have the New Year coming up in just a few days. So Jim and I would like to wish all of you a very Merry Christmas or a happy holiday, whatever it is that you observe, and certainly a Happy New Year. And we're going to do something just a little bit different today. About 3 weeks ago, on a micro moment, I asked everyone to post the questions that you would like for me to answer. And we had a phenomenal response to that. As I was going through every one of those responses, I would cut and paste things either over to the questions page or the requests page. And I had 4 pages of questions in very tiny print. And then I went through and categorized them because many of the questions followed a similar theme. And so I sort of condensed things into larger ideas. And I have today 33 questions on my list, and I don't think we'll get through all 33, so this might take a second video. So we're just going to jump right into those questions, and I was really impressed with the questions. They were really quite excellent, and I think whether or not you posted a question with us, I think that you will find these questions quite interesting. First of all, many people ask, why can't we can bacon, ham, cheese, butter, milk? And also related to that is, why can't we put flour or other thickeners in things like beef stew, before canning? The first part, the bacon, ham, cheese, butter, milk, all the dairy things, and the cured meats, the USDA does not recommend those for canning at all. Now, some people recognize that the reason is because there is no tested recipe for those things. When the USDA was doing all of their testing, and most of you know that they are not doing any more testing and haven't for quite some time, more than 5 years in fact. Key people have retired there and they have not been funded to do the very extensive testing, which is quite expensive, that they have done in previous years. And so there were no tested recipes for those things. Now, some people take license with that, saying, well, if it's just that there's no tested recipes, I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway because I know canning meat is safe, therefore canning cured meats should also be safe. Well, there's faulty reasoning there because those cured meats have other ingredients, have been smoked and other things which changes the consistency of the texture of the food, and it may interfere with heat transfer. Now, maybe it is safe, I don't know, and I'm not going to test it, so please don't ask me to do that. I don't have the extensive equipment needed or the type of test kitchen available to me to do that kind of extensive testing. I'm just fine with testing canners to see if they get up into the kill zone for long enough. That's well within my capability with equipment and knowledge, but not testing recipes or foods like that. And so it is best to avoid those foods. And you'll notice, if you have looked at channels that do can those things, there's no consistency about the processing times. Some people do it like they would do meat. Other people have their own favorite amount of minutes that they process with. And with that much variability, there's just not any kind of a standardized processing time that has been tested. I don't can those things, and I hope that you will choose not to either. Now, in terms of thickeners like flour and cornstarch, and that includes pasta and rice as well, we don't can those things either because they create a frothiness that also interferes with the heat transfer. Heat transfer is everything in canning, particularly in pressure canning, where that temperature needs to get up into the kill zone for a specific amount of time in order to kill the botulism spores. So that's why we don't can those things. Second question, I'm going to mark these off as we answer them. Can you use 2 different sizes of jars in the same batch of canning? For instance, can you can, my canner holds 7 quarts, but what if I only have 5 quarts? can I put in 2 pints and to make 7, or can I fill up the rest of the space with pints, even double stack the pints, but I can't double stack the quarts? Yes, you can do all of that, provided that the water does not come up over the top of the smallest jars. And then what processing time you use, you will always select to use the processing time of the largest jar. There are off-size jars too. There are 1.5-pint jars, 24 ounces. A lot of people really like that size. So what's the processing time for those? Well, that's right between pint and quart, and so you would certainly use the quart. The third question is, how do you can crackers, Cheerios, oatmeal, dry foods? Is it okay to store those? Yes, of course, it is okay to store those. Those are dry foods, and the best way to do that is either by vacuum sealing or oxygen absorber. Now, you need to recognize that there are ingredients in things like crackers, such as shortening fats and things that ultimately will cause those things to go stale, regardless of whether you put them in a vacuum environment, an oxygen-less environment, or what. And so the shelf life on those things is not really, really long. But, you know, I get a lot of questions related to this about which is better. Why do you use jars to do your vacuum sealing? Why don't you just use Mylar? We all need to make the selection of those things based on what outcome we want. Now, I prefer jars mostly. I do use some Mylar, but we put our Mylar, we vacuum seal our Mylar, and we have a video on how to do that. And then you could also put an oxygen absorber in place of vacuum sealing. And then we put them in bins. We live on the edge of the wilderness. I mean, literally behind our place is vacant for miles. And so there are rodents all over. And we sometimes get rodents in our garage. And that's where we keep our food storage. And so we have seen mice get into our Mylar. And so we put the Mylar bags inside a plastic storage bin as a double protection. But it depends on what you want to have happen. If you want to use Mylar is, it will not allow oxygen in once you've removed the oxygen and sealed it. Now I have 2 Mylar bags right here. You see, these are both from our freeze dryer from Harvest Right, and one is shorter than the other. That's because I'm going to reuse this one. Some of you have asked if you can reuse Mylar, and the answer is yes. We put freeze-dried sausage patties in here. I washed with soap and water after I cut them off and took the patties out. This is now ready for reuse and can be sealed again. So put crackers and Cheerios. You can vacuum seal them in plastic bags, but I would not use, I know there's lots of videos out there that show how you can use Ziploc bags and not have to pay the extra for regular vacuum bags. If that's your choice, go right ahead. That would not be my choice. I prefer the heavier plastic that is made for vacuum sealing. It will hold the vacuum longer. And know that in the plastic, ultimately, oxygen does leak back in. Mylar is secure against oxygen getting back in. So if you want longer term and safety against the oxidation that occurs when oxygen gets to your food, then Mylar is your best choice. But vacuum seal or put an oxygen absorber, one or the other or both. And there's no right way, there's no correct way to do this. You just think about what outcome you want and then you choose your equipment accordingly. Okay, next question. Why is the processing time, this was really a good question. Why is the processing time for raw pack and hot pack the same? It seems logical that if the food is already hot, it would take less time to get it up to the proper temperature, either 180 for water bath or 240 for pressure canning. And that is right. In terms of the logic of it, it does seem like that would be the case. But when the USDA was doing their testing, they could have had an individual processing time for every single thing. But wanting to make it more efficient for all of us, they grouped things into buckets, for lack of a better term. And then they used the same processing time that would fit a number of foods, so we wouldn't have to constantly refer back to a schedule of processing times for every individual food. Now, I can tell you from my own data collection, the many different batches that I have done in testing the 3 canners that I have tested. Every single batch of even the same food, like green beans or ground beef, every single one of those processes gives different results. The results differ. And so it's not a constant. So you need to pick a safety margin. And within that safety margin, that's where the processing time fits. Now, it's true that some foods will be processed a little bit longer than others at higher temperatures, but it is okay. So little food value is lost in the amount of time for the safety margins that it's just not even worth it. So that is why the processing times for raw pack and hot pack are the same. All right, a couple of people ask about weck jars. Because weck jars, the diameters are larger than a quart jar. And what about the headspace? At first, when I started, I did the mathematical calculations, giving the volume inside the weck jar for how much I needed to increase the processing time. And once I started collecting data on testing the canners, I realized that, while I really wanted to be so scientific about it, it didn't really matter, because the safety margins for foods that the USDA had given us also cover the weck jars. So just treat them exactly the way you would the similar size of regular jars. Like a quart and a liter are about the same. A half liter and a pint are about the same. So just use the same processing times, same headspace, everything there. Okay, now this was from a beginning canner. And this person asked, how do you can meat? Can you water bath it? Do you have to pressure can it? Can it be raw pack? Does it have to be hot pack? And let me just say, for anyone who is a new canner, meat is low acid along with all the vegetables. And anything that is low acid must be pressure canned. There is really no safe alternative. And so yes, please do count on pressure canning all meats. Now, whether raw pack or hot pack, what we need to do is to follow the USDA recommendations. Now, I will once again, in the description of this video, give the link where you can click on that link and go right to the USDA booklet. And I'm going to give you the link where it has a section for vegetables, a section for fruits, a section for tomatoes, a section for meats. And you can click on all of those and read everything that you need to know about the processing times for the individual types of meat and fruit and vegetables there. And you can also purchase that book, but it is a free download if you just would rather download it and put it on your own computer as well. So please follow the tested and recommended times and the ways, processes for canning everything, including meat. One person said, and actually this person was not the only one, is caring for elderly people and wanted to know a source for nutritious meals that you could just drop off at someone's house and they wouldn't have to open a jar like beef stew and separate out the liquid and put in the thickener and make it thick again. That's too much for some people to handle. So what are some ideas for meals that we could prepare that are very nutritious for elderly people? My parents have been gone for more than a decade, and Dad went first, and in his final years, Dad was brilliant, spoke 7 languages, was a university professor, was a brilliant scholar. And in his latter years, he had a stroke and lost some of his mental acuity, and Mother was his caregiver. And so those of us that lived close would prepare meals to make it easy for Mother. And we did them like little TV dinners, we bought a sectioned tray and put different foods that were already pre-cooked. All they had to do was just stick those in the microwave and warm them up. Now, sometimes there were things that shouldn't go in the microwave, like, for instance, a dessert of some kind. And so Mother would just lift that out and put it on a separate plate, microwave everything else, and then in just a couple of minutes there was a good and nutritious meal. That is my best recommendation for doing that, and it is so wonderful that many of you are caring for people who are either elderly or who are disabled in some way. And it's great that we are focusing on nutritious foods for them. Had one person request some recipes for wild game, and I don't know. I don't cook wild game. I never have. Dad would go deer hunting and brought venison in, and I just didn't ever care for it, at least the way it was prepared in our home. And I have tasted a couple of other things. Rabbit I don't mind so much. You know, rattlesnake is supposed to taste just exactly like chicken. I'm not that much of a fan of that type of thing. So I really don't have any recipes for wild game. However, the USDA does have canning directions for things like rabbit and even bear. And so you can check USDA for some of the ways that you can preserve wild game. And even though they don't say turkey, I just use, when I get turkey, I just use the recommendations for chicken. I had several questions about thermal shock. Now, thermal shock is when there is a temperature differential between the jar, the food that you put in it, the water you put in it, and then putting it in the canner. And thermal shock can cause breakage of your jars, and we actually have done a video on that. And it withstands heat and also temperature changes to a degree. Now, you don't want to take something from your freezer, a jar. Well, you don't ever want to use these in your freezer anyway. But say it's very cold from your refrigerator and then plunge it in boiling water, you're going to have thermal shock breakage there. So when I do beef chunks, I pull that beef from the refrigerator, leave it out on the counter for about an hour so it can warm up just a little bit. Jars are at room temperature, so I'll put the beef in the jars. Okay, so everything is room temperature to coolish. And then I fill it, according to the USDA recommendations, with hot, even boiling stock, broth, beef bouillon. That goes hot in that jar. Is that thermal shock? That much of a temperature differential will not hurt the jars. It's perfectly fine. And then I always have my canner just with the water, about 2 inches of water in the bottom when I can in my great big canner. And that water is just below boiling. It's just simmering a little bit. And so we will put those jars, immediately that boiling water heats up the jar, so the jar is now hot. I'll put it in the canner. And so we have quite a margin of safety with thermal shock when we use regular canning jars. So that's why we don't use mayonnaise jars or anything like that from the grocery store. Those are not made for canning. The next question is, what are the best pressure canning books for beginners? I'm going to recommend one of our videos which goes into more detail about that very thing. And that is The Changing World of Pressure Canning. And I will put that link in the description of this video, and I go into great detail about good references for that. So that would be something that you can look at. Someone else asked this question, several people did, and this is about headspace. Sometimes headspace is an inch, sometimes it's half an inch. Sometimes with the same food, it's half an inch if you do raw pack and it's an inch if you do hot pack. What is the deal with all of the different head spaces? Well, you know, I have been canning for so many years that I pretty much know when I can cheat on headspace, if that's what you want to call it, and when I need to really respect it. For instance, apple pie filling, you really want to respect headspace. I usually give more than an inch because that stuff just expands and it will go everywhere. It will ooze out of the jar if it doesn't have enough headspace. But with something like beef stew, I know that I can fill it almost to the top and it will be just perfectly fine. The testing that has been done with Headspace, and those Headspace recommendations are to help prevent siphoning. And so just follow the USDA recommendations. If you are a beginner, and I am now trying to model correct headspace in the videos, because our first several videos, I just did it the way I always did it. And a lot of times I don't leave a whole lot of headspace. But now I try to follow whatever it is that the USDA recommends. Food expands when it heats. It contracts when it cools. When it expands, it pushes up toward the top of the jar. And so that testing and the recommendations are based on how much expansion occurs with the food. So I just follow those. All right, so we are now halfway through our list, and this video is long enough. So we will come back in another week or so and finish the last half of these questions. Now, in terms of the requests that you have made, I had a lot of requests to do bean recipes, and we're working on that right now. So over the next few weeks and months, we will be running through that list and doing a lot of the videos and ideas that have been requested. So thank you so much for participating in this. These were such excellent questions, and I hope this information has been useful to you. And we will see you soon in our next video.